And I do think part of it is our disconnection from creation as a church and beauty, obviously, that those two go hand in hand. Because, I mean, I don't know who said this, but God wrote two books. He wrote the Bible and he wrote creation. And we should read both, and we should read both deeply.
Well, hello, everyone. Today I got to talk to my new friend, and there's a joke there, but you're going to have to watch about half the episode to find it out. But my new friend, Wendy Kieffer, who is the Conservatory Poet for VUVIVO, my friend Zach Elliott's ministry. She's obviously a writer, just released her first collection of poems called Alchemy of Praise. It's really good. You should go check it out. So we talk a lot about writing, talk a lot about story, talk about art, try to define beauty, and also talk about, is there something more to beauty than its usefulness? A lot of times, especially in the church, we think of beauty as something that helps something else. Like, we got to have our churches beautiful so that when people will come, or people feel comfortable, or people, will track with the message better because it's got beautiful slides. And not to say that beauty may not have that kind of effect, but is that all beauty is? Is it simply something that is useful? Is it purely subjective? A lot of questions we ask, and maybe have some answers, but certainly not all of them. So if you're up for an exploratory conversation about the arts and beauty in particular, and what it is and what it means and what does this have to do with God, this conversation's for you. So, Wendy, this is going to be the best podcast yet. No pressure, but with all of the trouble we've had in getting it scheduled, you just got to think this is going to be amazing. So I hope you're ready for the most amazing podcast episode ever.
What an introduction. Yes, let's go.
Well, first, I just want to, I don't think I know actually anybody that writes poetry. Nope, I take that back. I have a good friend, Michael Moody, and if other people know Michael Moody, he's probably the last person you would ever think of that writes poetry, but Michael's been known to write a poem or two. So I'm just curious about that. I don't know anybody that really writes poetry. When did you write your first poem? Do you remember that? How did you get into this? Is this something that's like been a part of your story your whole life? Like, you always knew you were going to be a writer, or is this something you discovered later in life? How did you come about it all?
I know that I've always been writing for as long as I can remember, but I was also always dancing and acting and doing skits, and just overall a very creative kid and teenager and adult. I don't think I've lost that, which is really great, because I think we all are creative and open and receptive when we're younger very easily. And then as we get older, it kind of, that part of ourselves wears down. But if you can keep it intact or keep it alive as you go into adulthood, now you have all of this knowledge, but also the creativity to do something with it, to do something really extraordinary. I like to tell the story of when I was 7, my mom put me in a beauty pageant, and that's what you did in the 80s, I guess. I don't think I had a vote in that at all, but she put me in, and I won Little Miss Florida Sunshine.
Miss Florida. All right.
I know, my claim to fame. And for my talent, when I went on to the nationals or wherever it was writing and reciting an original poem. And the poem was called The Gift of Beauty. So I look back on that, and that's just one of those defining cool moments that now, I see that I'm really invested in beauty. So
wow. And you were 7.
I was 7. Yeah.
So was this, you enjoyed it? Is any part of your story the pressure to succeed in these environments? I grew up playing sports, and that's an area that's notorious for parents living out their dreams through their kids or whatnot. And my experience was not that. I mean, it was loving, supportive parents that enjoyed what I enjoyed. So it was a fun experience there. And, parents often get a bad rap for putting their kids into competitive things when they're early and when they're young. But that wasn't my experience. What about you? Was it something that was fun for you and the family? Was it free? Was there something that was oppressive and dark about it? This is the opportunity to talk bad about your parents, by the way. No, just
What does Anne Lamott say? She's like, if you people wanted you to speak better about them or write better about them when you're doing your memoir, they should have behaved better. Like,
That's funny.
um, yeah, no, it was always done for enjoyment, for expression, for engaging with the world. I remember riding my bike and just going off on my bike, and I brought a journal with me and I would climb a tree. Back when kids did that, they just took off and climbed trees and I guess brought journals, and I would write poetry just for enjoyment for myself. And then, as I said, I got into many of the arts. I love the performing arts very much. I moved to New York City to pursue that. But I think when life circumstances changed and shifted, and I became a wife and a mom and a strong believer and was doing all of these other things, writing is the thing that was sort of just always stayed and became more prominent as the other things sort of diminished. So no, it was it's been therapeutic during some darker moments of my life. Definitely had some dark, trying, challenging times from like, I don't know, 14 to 22. But poetry was there to, I think, be an outlet for some of those experiences as well. It continues to be that for me, though that's not the only reason I write. It is definitely an effect of writing that's very therapeutic. It brings something beautiful out of something that can be ugly or challenging. So I've always liked that. Yeah.
How was the experience of publishing your first collected volume of poems? Moving from the therapeutic or something that you do that you enjoy and turning into a project that can become a bit of a tyrant, as Churchill once famously said. How was that experience for you? Was it still joyous? Was it toil? How did you balance it all?
I mean, for the most part, it was great working on it. It was great to see something coming to fruition. It got a little intense at the end because I was planning for a trip. My brother passed away right as we were going to publish. So there were some challenges that were pretty intense, but it felt like when I brought it home, and my kids had seen me sort of surrounded by papers, mad scientist in the office, sort of working on that deadline there at the end becomes like the sort of ninth month of pregnancy when you feel like it's coming. And I felt like when I came through the front door with the book, I felt like, look, children, here's your new baby. It felt like almost like a birth. That's something that is challenging, but feels amazing and completely rewarding when you get to the other side.
So you had mentioned that you think all people are creative, and I'm curious what you think about that. I agree that all people are creators, and I'm wondering what distinction there might be between being creative and being a creator. And there's probably not one, but I guess what I'm thinking, when we use the word creative, we typically think of something like, well, often art, literally art. A creative person is someone that is involved in storytelling, picture drawing, that kind of thing. But I think a biblical understanding of humanity, human nature, is that we are sub-creators. That's both the calling that we've been given by God to have dominion over this earth, to care for it in his stead, and to cultivate it, to create new things, to invent, to pioneer, to build, to solve problems, to bring order to the chaos. And I think inherent to all human beings is that creator quality. I'm curious if you agree with that. And is there a meaningful distinction between all people having this kind of built, like it's just inherent to us that we're creators, versus those people that we would look at and go, oh, I'm not creative like you? I guess what I'm asking is that expression wrong? Like, I'm not creative like you? Or is there something different and unique and special about people that are creative in storytelling and painting and film and things like that?
Mm-hmm. I think you're going to find across the broad spectrum of human beings that there are different sort of lights that shine a little brighter in one area, in one person. The engineering mind and the mathematical mind and the intellectual mind, the artistic mind. I think we all have it in us, but there's some that might shine a little bit brighter, might be more of a tug. It's interesting because I would consider my dad very creative. The way he thinks is creative. He sees the pun inside the sign or the the humor inside of something. His mind is working on multiple levels at once, which makes him a really warm and engaging person to talk to. He's also extremely intuitive. And I think curiosity is also at the heart of creativity, curiosity. And so he has these things, but he doesn't make art. He's just an artistic kind of creative being, the way he articulates and moves through the world. Yet I've never seen him make any art. So I think it's multi-layers. I think it's a multi-layered thing. I do think we have to be careful with our overemphasis on STEM sometimes, and this culture that we've kind of inherited, this very pragmatic culture, that we don't let the creative parts of ourselves die or become dormant as we age and grow up and, just try to make the money or whatever we're doing. That I think it is very important to blow on those embers and let that have a space just to live a rich and full life. And I don't know where I read this, but I think it was maybe it came in from Rabbit Room. I subscribed to their emails. And it was talking about a pastor who was giving a message, and he found that he wasn't able to articulate his message when asked to summarize it briefly. He was kind of like, well, I have trouble sort of pinpointing what it's all about. I'm noticing people nodding off or kind of, that, when you don't have the attention of the crowd, you can kind of just feel it. And he's like, I didn't know what was going on. And I just felt like I was in a rut. And he said, I started reading poetry just because it seems to be the thing people are interested in now. And I'm hearing about it. So I just gave it a try. And he said the scriptures came alive in a new way. Something inside of me started to kindle. And I noticed that my messages became more interesting and more nuanced and more creative and drew on more metaphors. And all of a sudden I found my audience was more engaged. And he's like, and I would owe it all to poetry. So I thought that was an interesting, person that might not think of themselves as creative, but enters into that space that maybe otherwise seen as, oh, that's just for creatives. That's not for me. And then found that it really blessed him in his ministry.
So in a world that, well, how do I say this? The older you become, the more responsibilities you have, the more you're concerned with something that just give me something that works. And I can push out creativity, the curiosity, the exploration, the attempt to bring something new into existence, not ex nihilo new, from literally nothing, but in a meaningful way, to bring something into existence that didn't exist before. Beyond mere utility, why do you think being creative in that sense is important to human beings and human flourishing? That's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Hopefully my off-the-cuff answer will be sufficient.
Yeah, this isn't scripted, so I'm not sure I know the answer to that question either.
Right.
And that's like rule one in interviewing. Right. Don't ask a question you don't know the answer to, but let's just see how many rules we can break here.
Okay, let's do it. First of all, in every single zone, I think it's important to be creative. I mean, Google understands this, which is why they're like roller skating around and kind of having fun in their office to create an environment of innovation. You need to have that creativity at the core. I think schools are another example. When my kids come home and tell me how boring their day was and about how they have a test and I'll quiz them, and it's just memorizing the facts. What is a cell? And it's memory, regurgitate, and it's boring. It's boring for the teacher to teach it. It's boring for the students to learn it. So at the core, I personally believe if you take some creative energy to teaching, if you take creative energy to whatever it is you do, it's going to be so much better. You're going to find layers that you didn't even know were there. And you are going to be less boring. Life will take on a new color. It will take on a new enchantment. It will take on, because now you're seeing the connection of everything. You're seeing multiple layers. And I find it to just be all the wonders and beauty of childhood still with you as an adult.
Yeah. But the wonder and beauty piece is important and is being pushed out in modern Western the modern Western world in many ways. Of course, there's still a big film industry and things like that, of course. But a post-Enlightenment West that prioritizes and has emphasized rationality, and not even to get into movements like empiricism and whatnot. There was this belief and this story that the way to really know what is really real is through reason alone, and science in particular, and in your senses. But I reject that view. I don't think that the way to understand reality fully is purely through reason. It's through things like imagination. It is through experience. And so this wonder piece, this beauty piece, like beauty isn't rationally apprehended. Now, you can talk about beauty in rational ways, and I think there is an answer to the question, what makes good art? But it's not, art isn't simply reduced to something that you then rationally understand, and that's the fullness of your experience with things like art and with beauty. And we live in a world where wonder is just going away, right? I mean, because of technology. When was the last time you and a friend had I wonder who was that person in? I think it was this person. No, you don't have those wondering conversations, even about who was the actor in a movie. It's just, why we even bother? Let's just go to Google. And so there's just like, when do we ever wonder about anything? And the reducing of the cosmos and the nature of reality to something that is purely rationally apprehended, I think is misguided. And it's just not the way that the world is. It's not the way that the universe is. It's not even how human beings were designed to interact with the world. And so, this creative space, it invites things like wonder and awe. It gives even the time for it. And there is something in the wondering and in the awe, and you use the word, this enchantment, where you do begin to apprehend the fullness of reality in a way that you can't do purely or merely reason alone. What do you think about that?
I think that is so well said. And I think that's the message that I'm hearing most disseminated right now, both from academia and just through the body of Messiah. That seems to be the message, that it's unreasonable to think that a being that is made with intuition, imagination, creativity, reason would only be using reason to understand truth. And I think that's what I love about poetry. I mean, 1/3 of the Bible is poetry. Why? Why? I think when we get into the beauty element of language, of our experience here on earth, and even as we interact with scripture and understand our relationship with God, it is more true. We have a fuller understanding of what is true when we have beauty leading us. Like a good example would be like in Psalms, if God is saying, I will hide you under the shadow of my wing. He could say, I will protect you. I will protect you is what he means, but I will protect you is inside of I will hide you under the shadow of my wing. But by saying it in that poetic way, I'm given a metaphor. Now I feel myself going close to the heartbeat of God. I'm right against his chest, and his wing is over me. I'm feeling the softness of the feathers. There's an intimacy that he's drawing on when he uses that metaphor. Not only that, now I'm connecting with nature, with owls and eagles. And when I see them, I'm reminded of the metaphor and the connectivity of all of creation. And now I feel more a part of it because I have taken the time to just understand I am hidden under the shadow of his wing. I don't just know it now intellectually, he protects me. I know it more fully with my being. I've experienced it through my senses and through my imagination, imagining that wing. And so he uses this all through scripture. And we've taken some of the poetry out of scripture in the newer translations, which I find really, that's why I go to certain translations. I can't not have the poetry be there, because I think it helps us to apprehend what is true and to know it with our being, not just the intellect.
Yeah. You had said you're finding this idea being disseminated everywhere, that the importance of the creative and things like story. Me too. I'm reading a book. I was like, why did I buy this book? Why am I reading this book? It's fantastic though. It's, what is it called? The Rise and Decline of Religious Freedom in America. I think that's the title. Really academic, really niche, like, 50 people have bought this book or whatever, but of those 50 people, they're leaders in this field and they're the book that says you should read it. Well, it's a wonderful book, and central to its thesis is that we live by stories. It's like the last place I would have expected to find that idea would be in a book like this, but it's central to his thesis that we live by story. And part of his thesis is the story concerning American religious freedom is wrong. The story we all think we know about it is wrong. And here's the actual story. And it's interesting. So if it is true, and I'm really inclined to think this, that we live by story, or we orient ourselves in this world through story more than anything else, there's one reason why creativity is important. But it's interesting because even when I say that, it's like, it feels like it just goes back to a utilitarian existence. Like, creativity exists so that we can know what is true better or more fully. And I think there's something more than that, because I think there's something about beauty in particular that's like almost, well, I guess another question that I don't have an answer for is, in some ways, I want to think that beauty is an end in itself, that it's not simply a means to something else. Or maybe that's not fully, because you think of a C.S. Lewis idea of beauty, that there's something about beauty that pulls you through the thing. Like, it doesn't just attract you to it. Like, you see something beautiful, sunset or whatever. It's not that you're just attracted to it. So maybe I'm arguing with myself here, because if what I was saying before is true, then that should be the end of itself. Like, the beholding of a sunset is the end in itself. But Lewis would say that you're actually being drawn past it. And that's kind of that longing ache that fills your heart when you behold something of great beauty. It's like, this is drawing me to something more, like a concept of perfection, maybe. And so maybe in that sense, the end of beauty is found when you behold the maker of all things. But I don't know. What do you think about it? Is there something about, like, I guess what I'm trying to do here is, I don't want to reduce beauty to simply something utilitarian that serves like rationality almost. It's kind of like, well, it feels like that's what we're saying. I don't think it is, but
No,
does that make sense? You see what I'm trying to maybe hedge?
I totally do. And I think we were just noticing one angle, like one benefit of it is that it helps you to apprehend what's true. But you're right. That's not the only thing that it does, or its sole purpose. And I think when we talk about beauty and truth and goodness, the transcendentals, it's sort of like talking about the mind and the body and the heart. We talk about them separately, but they really do rely on one another. They're kind of constantly in a dance with one another, and they don't really exist without the other. And so, I think it helps creativity. Yes, it helps us to live a more engaged life. I think we get better at the things that we're called to do. I think we keep the childlike wonder alive, and we blow on that ember so that we remember what it's like to be human. I think it also connects us more fully with our creator. Like you were saying, you see a sunset, it pulls you toward beyond the sunset. And now I'm looking at creation as a work of art. So I'm always praising the creator as I watch that sunset, or as I see something beautiful or amazing or miraculous, or as I look at science. And there's so many times when I'm looking at something, like my kids will bring home, what is a cell? And I'm like, that's amazing. Wow. And I immediately have a small moment of praising God. And so then again, that element of praise starts to follow you more and more as you engage with creation as a work of art, or as a work of engineering, or as a work of brilliance. And there is something that lifts you up out of just being in it and a part of it. And it lifts you up to praising the one who made it. And we're able to not just know God, that God is the creator, but we're more apt, I think, to walk through life engaging with the creation while praising the creator. So there is something, maybe, I think, about creation as a work of art that I think is, is really fun to explore as a creative mind or as someone who's engaging with their creative side.
And I think you said, if I heard you right, that the transcendentals are inseparable, like truth, goodness, and beauty, that it's right to put them in three different categories, but they aren't isolated, and that they are in many ways inseparable. And I think that maybe is a helpful way to resolve the thing I was talking about earlier, because yeah, it's true that things of beauty may help you understand things better, which feels like you're using beauty to serve rationality. And I guess one of the reasons why I'm like, no, we got to be clear about this is because I really don't like, let's make a movie to tell the gospel. Like, in many ways, it just feels forced. Like, you've got all these cheesy movies out there that it's like they're using art simply to serve a message. And when it just doesn't work. It just does not work that way. I don't think it works that way, or very rarely does it ever work that way. But here's the better way to think about it, right? True things are beautiful. And so, like, you think of a pastor who's listening to this or conversation, it's not like, how do I make my sermons more beautiful so that people will hear more and pay attention more? No, it's actually should just be like, what I'm saying is beautiful. I need to pay attention to that. And then let almost the creativity emerge from that. But we don't think about that, right? We forget things like beauty because, like, how does this serve some greater purpose or whatever? Mm-hmm. But I think a proper way is things that are true and things that are good. These things are beautiful, and what is beautiful about them needs to be something that we contemplate and think about, and then give ourselves the freedom to let that beauty be shown and to spend enough time showing this beauty, as opposed to just the rationality piece, or just the moral piece here. Right. I don't know. What do you think about that idea?
I mean, you gave me goosebumps. Yes, and definitely. And there's something about beauty, the beauty element, like you said, truth is beautiful. And but beauty will move you into that passionate place that all of a sudden is very contagious. It's very alive. It's very excited. I mean, that's what beauty does. It draws our attention. It holds us rapt. It engages us on a level we're not even aware of. And so if the truth is beautiful, then communicating the truth in whatever way you're called to do that in a beautiful way is to give that truth the honor and the wings that it is due.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you define beauty?
Oh goodness. People
all
have
the easy questions. Hey, hopefully what's evident at this point in the conversation is this is two people exploring something we're interested about more than we're experts on all of this. But I'm asking a lot of people this question because I don't know that I've found a satisfactory answer to beauty. I've got one that is the most compelling to me, but I'm curious what you think, how you describe beauty. Beauty in art, right, it's notoriously kind of defies definition. Yeah. And a lot of times people say it's hard to define, but when you see it, kind of thing. And I can appreciate that and I can understand that. Me too. But I'm just curious if you have something about a way to characterize beauty or define it or explain it.
I know that it's been defined, through the ages as something possessing harmony, balance, integrity, cohesion, those kinds of words. But I think we've misused it maybe in modern culture, where we think of it as always being something aesthetically pleasing to the eye. But I think are truly kind of edgy and ugly and awful can sometimes have a beauty
still
to
be
them.
Beautiful. Yeah, right.
Depending on what is being communicated or what is being overcome or how it fits into the story, as you were saying before.
Yeah. Do you think beauty is merely subjective, like the eye of the beholder kind of thing? Like something is beautiful something is beautiful because of a person's experience of it? Or do you think there's something objective to the concept of beauty?
I think, you have the penultimate pointing to the ultimate. And if you have these with the truth, goodness, and beauty, the transcendentals, then they have to anchor to something that is objectively true or beautiful or good. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the same for beauty as it is for truth and goodness, though, there are many shades of that. I think there is a wide breadth of what that would look like as far as we go, as far as trying to navigate through that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I hang on to from a definitional standpoint more than anything else, it's very similar, I think, to what you had said about maybe the way beauty is classically defined in harmony and whatnot.
Right.
Simply put, there's something about beauty that is perfection. Like you're beholding something that it raises in you this sense of awe because you're beholding something that's like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. And maybe not literally perfect, right? Because there's still that longing, or there could be the recognition, right? Like of something's not literally perfect, but it's like that this is perfect. And the reason I find that definition helpful is because it broadens our concept of beauty beyond just the aesthetic to other
Right.
experiences. Like when you, like, that's a beautiful song. Well, why are you saying that? It's more than I just like it, but like there's some sense of, oh my gosh, that's perfect. The way that was put together, the surprise there, when I thought the song was going to go this direction, oh my gosh, it went this direction. The lyric matching or being contrasted with the tone of the song, you know, the feeling, oh my gosh, that's perfect. And I think there's something about beauty that's what we're at. It's like what it's tapping into is this sense of perfection, and even connect to this objective thing, a connection to there's a way things are supposed to be in a perfect, pure, true sense. And it's also like multivariate, like there's different ways, like, you know, you can have two songs that are very different and you're wanting to say they're both perfect in a sense by using this word beautiful, or something your child makes that clearly is as flawed as it could possibly be, but you're still like, oh my gosh, that's beautiful, because there's something in that act, that creation, that you're like, that is perfection. That is the way things are supposed to be. And I've recently come across that. I want to say it was from Jordan Peterson, but maybe I'm not right about that. And that just seemed to me finally like a light bulb kind of go off in my mind of, yeah, that's what we're after when we talk about beauty. And when we behold something that we say is beautiful, there's some kind of notion of perfection and rest, and the way it's almost, what's weird, because it's not like a complete rest, because there also can be an ache and a longing there. And this is maybe why it defies definition, is because you gotta just spew something out like I did to try to get a handle on it.
It's great though, because some of it's just going to go beyond comprehension, but it's a feeling, it's a knowing, and it's the way it lifts you up off of your feet. But I think what you're noticing too, that harmony, the balance, the integrity, the clarity, those things create a kind of a where you hit the right note. So imagine if you had, flat or sharp notes within a certain composition, you'd be like, but when they're harmonizing, and when there's this balance, and when there's this, something feels, like you said, like everything is okay, everything is perfect, everything is the way it should be. I was listening to my daughter's choir perform this song, Alleluia, and there were all these parts going, and it was just one word, Alleluia, the whole way through. But I was so lifted off of this earth. I was goosebumps. I was crying. I was like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I understand why there's choral music in heaven, because I was like, this is just, it is. It was a perfect experience. It was a perfect moment. And I just wanted it to last forever. I just wanted to stay in that moment. And everything was okay. Everything was going to be okay in the world. Like, it's all going to be okay. That was that moment.
So what are some of your favorite books? And this is a bit of a hard transition in our conversation, maybe a little bit, but as someone who's a writer, as we're talking about things that are beautiful and in the way that we're talking about it, what are some of those stories and books that are just your favorite, that do for you what we're talking about here? What comes to your mind?
Well, there's been books that have shaped me, like Mere Christianity. That's a book that really shaped my entire sort of early years of faith. There are poetry books that I hold dear, that are really like, I don't go anywhere without them. That would be Sarah Teasdale. She's one of my favorite. She's super lyrical. R.S. Thomas is another one. I love Yeats. So certain poets that have really impacted me. Um, and then, there's just books that have shifted over time, like Brene Brown's Daring Greatly. That was another book that I read when it first came out. It really shifted my entire view of vulnerability and that idea that, especially as for artists, you typically are very vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there in a very vulnerable way. And about how that is actually the strongest, truest way to go through life, that all of us are vulnerable. And so if we try to hide it or work against it or pretend like we're not living in truth with the way we're made. We're not living in alignment with that truth. And therefore it makes us weaker, not stronger. And so that was good at just going into the whole poetry realm. And even now, as I'm publishing, I've had the question asked to me, what's it like when you put your deepest pain or your feelings out there for other people? And it's a very vulnerable thing to do. And not everyone writes like that. That's called confessional poetry. Some people don't write that way. They write, and there's more of a corporate style or more of a classical style of poetry. But in our modern era, we're very used to this sort of confessional style of poetry where it's personal experience or you're unpacking something very vulnerable to yourself. And I write in both styles. And I've often said that, there have been many poets that have been vulnerable, and I have greatly, I have been so deeply affected by their courage to be vulnerable. And I realize that that's actually probably the strongest, truest way I can go through life.
Has there been any cost to that? I mean, I can sense the risk of that, right? Why people would even ask this question.
Yeah.
Has that risk been realized in any way? And obviously you don't have to share anything that's too personal, although you are a confessional writer. So maybe this
podcast could end up in a poem, Mike. Be careful. No, I mean, not yet. So far so good. I haven't had any cost to it yet.
Yeah.
No, I think it's just, it is a risk, and it requires some courage, but I think ultimately it invites other people to be vulnerable or to realize that they already are.
Yeah. Well, it's again, it's going to resonate with people because it's an opportunity for a, me too kind of moment.
Yeah.
And I think with those writers, with probably a lot of good writers, you feel like you develop a friendship with the writer. It's weird, right? Like you feel like you become friends. And authors have often said they feel the same thing towards their readers, which is interesting. But from someone that's, this confessional writing and the vulnerability, I think it's almost like a next level. Like you really feel like I get to know this person. They've experienced the same thing I've experienced, and that creates a bond, right? Lewis, again, talking about C.S. Lewis, he says, a friendship is born whenever two people say, I thought I was the only one. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of experience in reading vulnerable poetry helps people not feel alone, and it kindles a kind of friendship with someone that they, of course, don't know, but it's very dear writing, and those kinds of authors are beloved. So it's good that people like you can do that despite the felt risk, whether it's realized or not. Right. It's funny when I think about, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You go ahead.
No. You go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that this, I'm living my life to the best of my ability, walking with God daily. And so what ends up happening in the poetry is that it becomes a kind of witness, because that I'm not writing, as you were saying earlier, I'm not writing so that I can reach someone with the gospel. Like that's not I don't sit down to write a poem. I mean, maybe if I had a special thing I was preparing, but typically I don't set out to make this message, that's going to go out and affect someone. I'm writing as either revelation or exploration, or I have to. Something is literally bubbling up, and there has to be words that come and give language to the feeling or the experience. And then the effect of that is that, yes, it will reach people, hopefully, please God, for the gospel. So, if I instance with a family member who was going through a very risky surgery, who's not a believer, happened to get a hold of my book before the surgery and was reading it and was so impacted by it and reached out to say, there's like a magical quality to your book. I don't know what it is, but I'm like, really, this is really helping me right now.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if I had handed her a book about Jesus, like, you're going through surgery and I really want you to meet the Lord. Here's a book called Jesus.
You need to meet the Lord. Here is the book.
Lord, like, she would have been like, I'm good, no thanks. But handing her a poetry book, it leads with beauty, and it leads with wonder, and it leads with experience, and it becomes a witness. But again, that's the effect of it, not necessarily the driving goal of creating the poems.
Right. And then when it is the driving, it's weird because like when it is the driving goal, in many ways, it just does not work.
It's weird. And I was thinking about this the other day. Like, I lived in New York City for a long time. And when I was up there, phones came out and social media and all that stuff was like coming. It was just starting to, really take, the runway. And I had tendonitis really badly. My arms were always like burning and I couldn't really be on the computer or phone much. I started having kids. So I didn't really get on social media till like 2020. Like, I was like,
wow, that's impressive.
I'm like grandma, because I'm like, how do I do this? Like, I don't even know what I'm doing. And I thought about it the other day. I'm like, I'm actually really happy that there was that long delay, because you get into this thing with socials where you're like, especially if you're young and you haven't formed who you are and what you believe, and you haven't had experience yet, that you're posting for the crowd, and you're thinking about the crowd when you post, rather than writing and living and experiencing for yourself and for God. And then eventually, hopefully, you'll have something that's worthy of sharing with other people. But it's not the goal of your whatever it is you're doing. And so
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I'd never thought about that. The primary form of writing for our kids is public, and it's for posturing.
Yes.
Like they write for other people so they will be seen the way they want other people to see them.
Yeah.
I had not considered the impact of social media in that way, and in the sense of like good writing, the vast majority of writing probably needs to be just for you, right? That's the outpouring. And at some point there are projects or works that are good for other people, but a lot of writing can't start with, this is for someone.
Yeah.
But that's almost the extent of youth today. They're writing, it's for someone else. Oh, that's really interesting. I don't know what else to think about that or say about that, but it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that before.
For the persona, it's for the likes, it's for the, and one of the key elements to good writing is honesty, is authenticity and honesty, among other things. But to write well is to be honest. And so to find that authentic voice, it takes time, and it takes mistakes, and it takes exploration, without being like you're doing all that in public for other people. I think that might hinder some young, upcoming writers. I don't know, but I'm glad I got to jump over that, even though I feel still with tech.
That's pretty interesting, how social media is killing the honesty in writing. That's an interesting idea to explore.
Yeah,
and then not even talking about it.
Or at least hampering it. It might not kill it, but maybe some people feel really motivated by their audience. And so they, maybe they're able to allow that public forum to draw out something honest and deep. I don't know, but I just feel like there's a time to go to the workshop, to spend your time honing your craft in the shed, in the workshop. And then, I'm not saying everything has to be perfect when you share it, of course, but
so how do you balance that? Because so there's obviously, we've talked about this, writing that it's for yourself. In some ways, it ought not start with the audience in mind, but there is obviously a time for writing where the audience is kind of the point. I mean, it's like, why tell a story that no one's going to hear? Why write nonfiction that no one's going to read? This thing. So how do you balance this, right? That's pretty tricky. How do you balance that kind of creative honesty with works that are going to be public? What's the trick there?
I'm still figuring that out. Maybe
yeah, right.
I don't know. I think you write what's being revealed, and you write what's important to you, and you write what burns within you, and you try to hone your craft and be honest and integral to your own experience and feelings. And then when you present that, maybe that will help to shape the feedback that you get will help to inspire and shape your next work, perhaps. But I don't think I have that figured out yet. I do think it's fun to think about the reader. I do think, because I was writing for so long without really sharing, that's been something new for me, is to really think about the reader. And there's a really beautiful conversation that I think is always taking place between the writer and the reader. And like you said, they're meant to be shared. Even the poem itself is like a conversation between you and yourself, you and God, you and creation, you and someone else. It's a conversation between you and maybe what came before you historically, or what lies ahead. I mean, then that conversation gets shared and creates a new conversation. And it's definitely feels like it wants to be shared. I just think there is a sort of a critical incubation period that might be nice to have time where it's not public, where it's, especially as you're growing as an artist.
I think this is a reason for things like guilds, where writers can talk about how to do this, right? Because it's probably not standardized. Like, the way you would need to protect what we're talking about is probably different than the way I would need to protect it, though there might be some things in common. And I'm just thinking about like my writing experience. Like, I have 2 published books, totally different experiences. Relational Apologetics was written, I started writing it when my late 20s, not even finished with seminary, literal nobody in terms of like a platform or anything like that. My high school teacher, part-time, bivocational high school teacher, and like a preaching pastor of sorts, associate minister, I think was my title. And so I get this idea for a book driven just by the students. Then apologetic material almost 20 years ago now at this point wasn't the same as it is today. And so I write this without any expectations, no deadlines. I mean, I figure out how to write book proposals, then I get a bunch of let's just be friends. And so then I decide to self-publish it. And it's simply driven by the desire to help. And I'm writing in the kind of freedom without, if I don't finish it, no big deal. It's such total freedom in writing that. But Why You Matter, the second book I wrote, totally different. Big advancement on it, contract, deadline. And I had to write it during COVID. So you think of these romantic notions of what authors do. They go to their cabin, right? And they do all this stuff. I'm sitting out in my driveway with a crappy folding chair because we didn't have anything better. While all my 5 kids are home because school's shut down. My wife teaches online. That I'm going to be careful. This is public. That school keeps things going. Like, it's great. This is what we're made for. So my wife's still teaching. Kids are all home. Public school thinks somehow we're still going to keep doing education with our kids. I'm like, I've got a month. I've got to get this book. So I'm out writing in the driveway. I have a neighbor come up to me at one point and says, "Hey, do you know one of your kids just jumped off the roof?" And I love questions like that. Yes, I knew it. I give my kids permission to jump off the roof. Right. In fact, I watched him and cheered him on as he was. No, I didn't know he jumped off. I know who did it. I guarantee you, I know which kid did it.
Hilarious.
And then but like that. So here I'm thinking about like with that first book, there was certainly a kind of creative. I don't know if I want to full on say creative authenticity that I didn't have with the second book, but the second book's experience was very much different. And so I'm really curious that I'm with the next book project, like I'm like entertaining ideas in my head of like, whether I just do it the self-published route so that I can have that complete creative control from start to finish and just do the book I want to do on my own terms. Or I'm thinking about if I were to do a publishing deal, I picked up a tip from J. Warner Wallace in the last podcast where I think he said it in the podcast and not before. Either way, I don't think it's proper to share. He didn't ask for an advancement on the book. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think that would be freeing for me too. It allows me to write knowing I don't owe the book company anything. And like literally when you get an advancement, you don't owe it back. You don't have to, if you don't make that amount, you don't have to pay them back. But still there's a kind of a pressure where now you have a master of they've given me this money because they think the book's going to sell that way. I got to write this book so it will sell that way.
Right.
And that's a kind of, I think that's an unholy thought. It's an evil thought that just not asking for an advance.
Right.
I'm wondering if it frees you from that. So anyhow, this is just interesting. And I think something like a writer's guild and being a part of like things like that are really important for writers and a number of artists in general, that they need other people to help them process and work these things out.
Absolutely. And for me, I joined up with V3 via VUVIVO. And that was a real blessing to me because, maybe I didn't have other poets, but I had other inspiration and the Zach, like just the way he teaches and kind of shifts vision and perspective and gets you like, there's so much inspiration. Or even we'd have a chapel worship night where they would want a poem on a certain theme. And if I couldn't find one, I would just write one. And so I had this community to kind of where these poems could sort of stand up and live, or where they were very, there was a drive, a very organic and natural drive to write that created a sort of pressure, but a very positive pressure. And so I think maybe finding the right people to walk out the vision with is really important. And that's just a blessing from God that I did not, that's my husband and Zach talking at a park one day. That's really like really blessing of how I joined up with the ministry. But then I found even at the creating the book, having the deadline, it really helps. It helped me, even though it was stressful. It helped me get it done on time. It helped me. I mean, like I said, I went through a really tough time right as I was getting ready to publish. And then I had a pilgrimage scheduled to go through the hillside of Scotland with this group. And I remember I was on the train from Edinburgh to Melrose, and my friend was helping me like organize how the poems were going to flow. Again, because we had added some at the last minute, which changed the manuscript a little. And so here we are on the train, she's like, how about you throw this one? And this one belongs in the back. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, okay, very organic and a little bit stressful, but at the right people. She was the right person helping me. The woman who published it was the right person, and the team that the V3 that kind of the project was nestled in. It just felt really good to do that with those particular people with that particular vision. So I find deadlines helpful, but I don't know about the advancement because, like you said, it kind of you're more beholden, I think. In that.
Well, I really do think it's probably different for each person, and none of those things that I talked about I think are inherently wrong. And a time and a place for those things and different people, but you need the advantage of having people help you process things like this and be careful about overcorrecting. And just because you had this experience the first time, don't go too drastic this way. And having an artisan's guild to help you, that's just one way that something like that could help you. I'm great. V3 is a gift, right? Zach Elliott, man, if you listen and watch this, I really like you, and I meet a lot of people who say the same thing. So you're doing great work there. Yeah. Hey, I want to talk about one more thing here, and it maybe might again feel like a little bit of a hard break, but I was a pastor for 11 years, and so I'm always very interested in how the things that I get to talk to my friends and people like you with, my friends and people like you. How you like that statement? Well,
maybe one day I'll earn the title And I don't know.
Is it too
Maybe one day.
it's too presumptuous to say you're my friend after an initial meeting, right? So, but that's a pretty funny way to say that, isn't it? With my friends and people like you. So, all right. So when you see that this is left in the podcast, you'll believe what I said about it. Leave it. This is the kind of,
Yeah,
I'm too worried about it being uncut, pretty raw and real. And now I've even forgot what I was saying. Oh, I was a bastard. So I'm always curious about how what we're talking about affects the church. And there's a lot here that I think is relevant, just this notion of story. If it's true that we live through story, we live by story. I don't know that story is present at all in the church anymore. And you have kind of two different extremes. You have the Stephen Furtick, topical, inch deep, self-help, feel good, whatever. And I don't know that's really story, right? It's just kind of motivational teaching. And maybe that's an unfair treatment of Furtick, and I can get all the hate mail, I guess, and I'll repent if it's worthy. But then you have almost like another extreme, which is like, I go to a Bible preaching verse by verse. My pastor was trained in hermeneutics and exegesis, and we just spent 4 years in the book of Romans, church. And I'm really almost starting to become just as guarded against those churches as the Furtick kind of churches. And here's why. Tell me what you think about this. It's somewhat of a new idea, and I'm happy for people to tell me I'm wrong about this. But so going back a little bit, you have during the Enlightenment, at the tail end of it, you have folks like Derrida and his deconstructionism, which is the long and the short of this idea is that there's no meaning in the text. There's literally no meaning in the text. You can't ever know what an author intended. You never can get into his mind. Language is a failed medium to communicate ideas because all languages are symbols. Like a word is simply a symbol that humans created. And these symbols, how do I know what this word means? Well, it connects to other symbols that humans created. And so all language is a human invention of symbols that connect to other symbols. And at best, it allows you to kind of talk around a thing, but never actually apprehend it as it is. Therefore, experience is all that matters. So when you read a book, you don't worry about is there any meaning in it? There's not. All that matters is what it means to you. And a lot of us have been to Bible studies where we got sick to our stomach because we just read a passage and then the Bible study, the Bible leader said, so what does this mean to you? And it's like, well, it doesn't matter what it means to me. It's like, what does it mean there, right? Okay, so that's an appropriate response to deconstructionism, right? No, there is meaning in the text and we can understand it. And so all the seminaries that teach hermeneutics, that's good. You can understand what Paul was writing. You can do that through a literary analysis. Just the letter itself will often explain it to you if you know how to do any kind of just literary analysis and just follow context and things like that. You can get historical context. You can get theological context. You can do the work needed such that you can have with high confidence what Paul meant there. And then you figure out, what does this now mean for me? What am I to do with it? Okay, I think all of that is good. But here's where I think the problem came in. I think a lot of this, I go to a Bible preaching church, the preaching style is an overcorrection to Derrida, where we spend 45 minutes proving to our people this is the meaning in the text. And here's all of the commentaries that show me that. And here are the competing views. And this is why I think this view is false. And this is the correct view. And you may sit through a 45-minute lecture and hear truth. And if you take copious amounts of notes and then you're able to dissect them with a friend later, you may also now come to an agreement that, okay, the pastor, that's the proper analysis of that passage. And now I can do the work of trying to figure out what this means for my life. That's a lot of work. It's a heck of a lot of work that we're putting on the people in the pew. And what they also don't have is they don't have a story that they're connecting any of this to. So at best, you may get what are seemingly a random assortments of true things that the pastor showed you from that. And if you remember it all on Monday, you don't know what is the story that it connects to. So I think that preaching is almost as harmful to the state of biblical worldview in our country as is the verdicts. And this is kind of what I'm getting overly excited about or ramped up about, because I'm like, I think that's part of the problem. And it's an unintended consequence to a good thing. And if I can just land this plane, what I'm inclined to think about this is that pastors ought to be doing that kind of prep, such that when they come to one of Paul's letters, for example, they have a good degree of confidence that this is what Paul meant and I did the appropriate work. But then they need to tell that story through Paul's letter on a Sunday, not give the analytical lecture that shows why they're right about what they're saying here. And if we continue down the road of having no story basically being told on our Sunday mornings, I don't think all of those Bible preaching churches are going to make a difference when it comes to the biblical worldview of the coming generations, because it keeps going down and down and down. And I think one of the biggest reasons is we've left story out of preaching. I don't know. What do you think about all that?
I mean, we've left story out. We've left beauty out. We've left poetry out. We've left the things that inspire and sweep you up past yourself. We've left a lot of it out. I mean, that's, I listened to a lot of Tim Keller. He recently passed away. He was the pastor at Redeemer City in New York. Redeemer Church. Yeah. I don't think it's Redeemer City. I think I got that wrong. Redeemer Presbyterian in New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I listened to a lot of him. And one thing I loved about his sermons is that he would take you on a journey. He would bring in philosophers. He would bring in so many, even intellectual ideas. But he was always heading every single sermon toward the gospel. And he would end with the gospel. And always, every time, you could kind of expect it. And there was something about that. I mean, Paul says, I just preach the gospel. I mean, that's what and you're like, well, that's so simple. That's the milk. We're on to the meat now. No, when I watched Tim Keller, I would watch him give this tremendous amount of meat to his congregation, but it always ended. It never went past or higher, or we kind of, the gospel's just for new believers. It always was integrated into that story. And so there was something about taking our individual stories and expanding them to the meta story, feeling like, where do they fit in to the ultimate story? And I think that is something that the church has to offer, that those who are not walking out this Christian worldview, this experience, there's less connection to your own story than there ever has been before, and less connection to what makes a good story. Like you were saying before, recognizing your own story. This has been something, I might have heard this from Jordan Peterson too, but basically that when you face challenges, thinking of it like, well, the hero of the story has to face the dragon. And the hero of the story can either face the dragon, or they can run and hide, evade, ignore, disengage. There's so many other things to do besides face the dragon. But if you face the dragon, obviously there's always the treasure and the reward there, but also the excitement of, I'm on an adventure. And whether this dragon is internal or external, I must face it to enter into the great adventure called my life. If I just sit and disengage and kind of wade through a comfortable life over here, I will not be excited about my life, because I'm not challenging myself. I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to realize the story that I'm in and the choice that I make to face the dragon. But then even bigger than that is, I think what you're getting at is, for pastors, that there's a meta story that we're all a part of. And, really making sure that you're attuning your message and your vision to that meta story, so that everyone knows where they're nestled in, what they're a part of. I think that really helps. I saw Tim Keller do that quite a bit. So I think story is really powerful. And I agree, and this is also why it's the testimony in Revelation. It says they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the power of their testimony. And there's something about your own story and being able to articulate that and being able to live that out consciously that I think helps us to overcome.
I don't know, in many ways, the way forward with a lot of this stuff. I feel like I'm pioneering out in untamed land with some of the stuff that we're talking about here. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm head of an apologetics organization, and you can imagine the stereotypical view of that. Like, it's all reason. And here we're talking about how pure reason doesn't get us where we want to go. I've been a part of the church forever, right? And I don't know what this story piece looks like. It's like I have no imaginative framework to envision what a Sunday morning that embodies what we're talking about looks like. I mean, I've got bits and pieces, but it's like, I also feel like I don't feel like I've been a part of myself leading one, because I was a pastor of a church. I don't know that I ever did it well myself, or been to a church where it's like, yeah, this is how you do it. So you think Keller was pretty close, and I know people will now hear that and go like, well, Keller was wrong about this and wrong about that. Well, yeah, that's fine. He can receive his fair criticism on particular issues. But when it comes to what we're talking about here, he thought he did this pretty well. What, any other places, or this sounds so cliche to say, resources to help us think about this, or books that you think maybe are enlightening on this topic? Anything come to your mind about this?
I mean, I share your frustration, or at least like not kind of that no man's land of where do I go from here. And I do think part of it is our disconnection from creation as a church, and beauty, obviously, that those two go hand in hand. Because I mean, I don't know who said this, but God wrote 2 books. He wrote the Bible and he wrote creation, and we should read both, and we should read both deeply. And so somebody like my dad, who it would look at the church and say, I don't fit in here. This isn't inspiring me. This is sit up, stand up, sit down, sing a song, hear a message, look at a book. And I'm not inspired. Where's the nature? Where's the beauty? Where's the,
what adventure is this calling me to?
What adventure is this calling me to? Exactly. And then, the idea that that when I go out into the forest, I feel like I'm in God's cathedral. And so that can't just be a thing that someone's saying that's sort of rejecting the church. I think the church needs to realize that God is the, so much the church, the actual building is this world. And if we can engage with it that way and allow it to impact us in the wonder and the beauty of it, and like you said, know what story we're a part of, it's going to bring in people like my dad that are right now looking at it and going, that looks like a place where you go and learn, like a classroom, and then you go home and you have homework. But I'm not inspired there. And I think what Tim Keller did, bringing in the gospel every time, he inspired me. And if I brought someone in who did not know Christ, I knew they were going to hear the gospel preached. Whereas a lot of churches, they just preach to the people who are already there. But Tim Keller used to say, you need to preach to the people you want to be there. You need to preach to the people who aren't there. And then people will bring them there. If you're remembering all of those intellectual New Yorkers who kind of maybe had faith as a kid, maybe not, but then grew up and thought, oh, that's just silly. If someone will bring that person in to sit down if you preach to that person who's not there.
So I certainly don't intend this as a harsh criticism on any of my pastor friends that are watching this, or the church I go to right now myself. And as I said, when I pastored, I don't look back at that and go, man, if people just did what I did, I don't think I did what we're talking about here either. And I also wonder here, as we're talking about this, if it's misguided to think an hour and a half service could do what we're talking about. That's not to say that maybe there shouldn't be elements of the service that are refined and tweaked based on what we've said, but it's probably wrong to think that an hour and a half service can do what we've done. And maybe that's also part of the problem, is that we've reduced, like, our imagination of the church has been reduced to a 1.5 hour service. And yeah, what could a 1.5 service really call you to if we're talking about this adventure? So maybe part of it is just reimagining the role of our weekly gathering in the life of the church. which is a funny almost way to say it, because you're like, wait a minute, the life of the church isn't that on you. It's like mostly it's Sunday and then maybe we have something else. But reimagining how that 1.5 hour service is a part of what it is to be the church. Maybe that's the key, or one of the keys.
Maybe we realize where we are lopsided. So if we say, well, we've done a good job with truth and goodness, but we've really let beauty go. Our churches are like, they used to be a Publix and now it's a church, it's a box. And we've kind of been okay with letting beauty be something the culture gets into through art and media and movies. But we are just good and true. And I think as a friend's church in the area, it's filled with artists. And so if you go to a Good Friday, everything is just so beautiful. The music is like all these musicians on stage, and the candles are just very lowly, like dimly lit. And there's so much attention to the beauty and the atmosphere that's being created. And then they just walk through the story of that moment before, as he's going to the cross, they read the scriptures, and the whole thing feels like I'm not just listening to someone's words. I'm entering into a space that has been curated through beauty, through attention to detail, to create an atmosphere, and all my senses are engaged in what's happening, and I feel like I'm experiencing the truth of the story, not just listening or knowing it. And then on Easter Sunday, the whole place is filled with fresh flowers, and there's jubilant music with their brass band playing, and you walk in and you're like, yes. And so maybe we just need to remember beauty and how important it is, and not think of it as something of like an extra thing. Like, well, if we have enough money in our budget this month, maybe we'll get some flowers or something. Maybe it needs to be that we give almost equal weight to than we do the truth. If they are transcendentals and goodness and the good, true, and beautiful reflect God's nature, then maybe we analyze our space and our service and say, well, how is beauty represented here in the way that would give God the most glory?
I think that is a fine idea to end on and just to think about. I know that this conversation has given me a lot to think about. I'd be really curious to hear back from anybody that followed this conversation all the way to the end and listened what they think about it. So hit me up with those ideas, or find Wendy and hit her up with these ideas. You can find her at VUVIVO.com. That's vision up, vision in, vision out. That's what VUVIVO stands for. You can find more about her there, her book, Alchemy of Praise. And really interesting stuff, Wendy. I look forward to the next time we get to talk.
Same here, Mike. Thank you so much for having me on.